Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's December America Walks webinar, Transportation in 2025, a look ahead. We know this is always one of the favorites out there, so glad to have you join us all today for a great panel coming up. Um, the election in 2024 really set the stage for transportation and developments in transportation that will be happening in 2025. We saw both a consequential federal election and a host of successful transportation ballot measures at the state and local level. So today we're going to cover what does this mean for next year and beyond. I'm Ben Crother. I am the Policy Director for America Walk, and I'll be our facilitator for today. And I'm joined by three great panelists, each of whom is going to share some of their insights at the federal, state, and local level into the transportation developments they expect for the upcoming year. So we'll hear first from Beth Osborne, who is the Vice President of Transportation and Thriving Communities at Smart Growth America, where she leads their transportation work, including Transportation for America and the National Complete Streets Coalition. Beth's a veteran of USDOT. She served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy and Acting Secretary for Transportation Policy. And she's also worked extensively on Capitol Hill with several congressional staffs. Then we'll hear from Katherine Garcia, who is the director for the Sierra Club's Clean Transportation for All campaign. Her advocacy focuses on reducing transportation emissions to protect public health, improve air quality, and address the climate crisis. Katherine serves on the National Center for Sustainable Transportation Leadership Council and the League of American Bicyclists Board of Directors. And then last, we'll have Hana Creger, who is the Associate Director of Climate Equity at the Greenlining Institute. Her work covers the development and implementation of policies and programs leading to clean mobility and climate resilience investments that benefit low-income communities of color. She's the lead author of Greenlining Report's Mobility Equity Framework and the Clean Mobility Equity, a Playbook. And Hana also leads Greenlining's legislative campaigns in California and nationally to advance sustainable and equitable transportation developments. Now, before we dive in today, just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors who make this webinar possible, the Do Good Foundation and Tool Design. And our webinars are also supported by donors like you. So if you enjoy our previous lineup of webinars, enjoy today's webinars, and would like to donate to America Walks, there's a link in the chat that will be appearing shortly, and your support helps make more webinars like this happen. Last but not least, before I turn it over to our panelists, a few housekeeping issues. If you have a question, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. You can enter your questions there. We'll cover questions after hearing from all three of our panelists. But as you're listening, something comes up, type it in. We'll get it in the queue. This is also where you can turn on closed captioning and subtitles for this webinar. And of course, the most important question, will this webinar be recorded? It will be, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel for you to check out later and share around as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Beth to give us a little bit of an overview of where we're coming from and where we expect to be in 2025.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I do need to pull up my presentation. And I just realized I guess I'm leaving that to you all to do. I'm Beth Osborne. I am with Transportation for America, which is a national nonprofit focused on creating a transportation system that connects people to jobs and essential services, no matter how they travel, no matter their financial circumstances or their physical ability. I had some slides that I wanted to share, but I don't see a place that allows me to share from my computer. Oh, it just popped up. Forget it. Here we go. So we're going to start by taking a look at 2025, but first we have to take a look at where we have come from. So, everyone remembers the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021 and all of the things to be excited about from that bill. Safe streets and roads for all funding, electrification funding, new climate programs, things like that. But what I want to make sure people realize is those were very bit players in a much bigger bill that was overwhelmingly a status quo bill. It really ended up being mostly the same program that we had before the bipartisan law. And a lot of people pointed out that we had record funding for transit. We did, but as you'll see, it came in the same proportion as the new record funding for highways. The rail infrastructure portion was the real new part of that. That did come in a big chunk, but has been spending extraordinarily slowly. We've done an analysis of the climate impact, and you all might not be full climate activists, but the sorts of programs that we who want to see better active transportation want are the ones that keep climate emissions and emissions that impact health low. What you can see on the right there is if you look at the way the money, the overwhelming majority of the money that went out to state DOTs, they spent a large amount on highway expansions and new highways. And while there are other big portions of funding for things like resurfacing and active transportation, not so big, and other things, it adds up to a net production of emissions. It has an overall negative impact because the good stuff doesn't outweigh the bad. And while there's been better spending in the competitive grant programs, you'll see that the reduction caused there is not close to enough to overcome the incredible increase on the formula side. You'll also see that the highway dollars went out much faster. There's tons of flexibility and tons of money, but the highway dollars moved faster than active transportation, certainly faster than transit, and way faster than electrification. So those dollars hit very quickly. Um, and one thing I think that's really important for this group to see is we actually found that even highway safety improvement program dollars were being spent in a way that had an increase in greenhouse gas emissions because a lot of states are justifying congestion reduction projects like adding right-hand turn only lanes and things like that, slip lanes, as safety projects because they prevent rear end crashes. They increase the opportunity for a high speed crash that could be deadly with active transportation, but they're justifying it to avoid some property damage. So we really need to dig into the policy of these programs. It also might surprise you to see that some states that you might view as being not friendly to issues like climate and active transportation actually do well when it comes to their climate emissions, and some states that voice very popular support for those very same outcomes not doing so well. And that's because uh, those states that are in the green just aren't building a lot of new highways. And usually it's because of a desire to keep costs down. So it doesn't have to do with some of the reasons we might be pushing for a different expenditure of dollars, but it has the same effect. Now, I'm going to move into some quick, better news. And that is there's a lot of money left to be spent. We did our analysis based on all the spending up until this summer, but there's a lot of money yet to go out, and we can have an impact on how states spend those dollars. But to be clear, there is nothing in the bipartisan infrastructure law or in what this administration, the Biden administration, has done that guarantees that that money is spent well. In fact, if the old adage that the best way to predict future action or behavior is through past behavior, we should expect that it won't be spent in a way that we would like to see it spent, but we can start to push our states to spend their funding differently and look past what verbiage they use about their priorities to the action they take. Now, what to expect in the next Congress? There are a lot of people who are very concerned about the new Congress and new administration's priorities on transportation. One thing I want to point out is, had we been a little more concerned about that in the last Congress and last administration, we might have gotten better results. But we didn't accomplish a ton that is permanent and structural. We accomplished very little, in fact. We did get some good competitive grant dollars distributed, but as I showed you, it wasn't enough to overcome some of the damage done with the formula dollars. So I guess the good news is we don't have a lot to lose. But also, like I pointed out, there are a lot of very conservative states that may not be talking about things like climate, that are interested in safety, that are interested in getting the biggest bang for their buck and fixing what we have before they build new stuff. So, what to expect? The status quo groups, the groups that make a lot of money off the program as it exists now, are already producing their wish lists for the next reauthorization. And I've already started to see some letters and statements coming out of them saying, give me more money, don't tell me what to do with it, and don't hold me accountable for results. So we should expect that. We should expect that they'll start to focus on the fact that our trust fund that pays for these programs is going to run into massive funding problems in 2028, which is going to make the next reauthorization very challenging. And we're going to start to feel pressure to find ways to fill the gap. My organization's taking the position of we will not fill any gap. We would rather, because on the whole, the results have been so bad from this program, we aren't going to fight for little slivers of good that come with a huge cost of bad. So if people want our help in funding the program, we're going to have to see some major policy change. You should expect some threats and proposals like kicking certain things out of the program. The problem is that there's not enough funding coming in through gas taxes to just pay for the highway program alone. And when you're needing to come up with more money, you need a big tent. So kicking people out of the tent is a bad start. I think we'll see discretionary grants going to different winners, likely more rural, likely more highway. But while I've seen bad news, the last Trump administration did not fund transit hardly at all through discretionary grants. They did fund active transportation. So there might be ways to get in there and really encourage that. And there are several existing or pending regulations that will be repealed or shelved. I think bad news for cafe standards and things like that. But unfortunately, a lot of the things that we were excited about in the Biden administration never really proceeded past the planning phase. So we don't have anything to lose because we did not accomplish what we really needed to accomplish there. A good lesson for the next time. And I'll finish up by just talking about what we should expect before the current the IIJA, or bipartisan infrastructure law, expires at the end of next Congress. You'll start seeing members of Congress having meetings with stakeholders next year, early in the year. They'll start having hearings on what is working and not working and what the problems are and needs are in the current program. You could see a White House proposal at some point, though they're hard to get together quickly for a new administration. You'll likely see some bills out of the House and Senate in early 2026, maybe late 2025. Hearings on those bills. But my guess is they will not. This is what they need to do to get things done before the current bill expires. I don't think they'll be able to pull it off. And we will be looking at an extension to the following Congress. So another election between now and when a reauthorization will happen. So that is where I'm going to stop. And I am going, I think, to hand things off to Katherine.
Thank you so much, Beth. Hi, everybody. I'm Katherine Garcia, and I lead the Clean Transportation for All campaign at the Sierra Club. I'm going to try to share my slides. Okay. Let's see. Sorry. Can you see any slides?
You look good.
Okay. Is it in presentation mode?
No, we just have your slides.
Okay.
Katherine, it looks good from my end.
Okay. So if I go like this, did that switch the slides?
It sure did.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so let me see. I'm using two screens, and so I just can't see what I'm presenting. So again, I'm Katherine Garcia. I'm based in Washington, D.C., land of the Piscataway people. And I've been working at the Sierra Club for 7 years on transportation policy. And I also am part of the Bike League and the National Center for Sustainable Transportation Leadership Council. I did want to include two pictures. One is of my absolute favorite trip, which was a cross-country trip on Amtrak from New York to California. And this more recent photo is here in DC with my 4-year-old son on our cargo bike. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Sierra Club, our mission, and also what the moment is like right now, and talking a little bit about the election, but also the health and climate impacts of vehicles, and also looking at advocacy, and also some links and resources. So first of all, in terms of the vehicles producing tremendous air pollution across our country. And this is due to policies that have impacted mostly communities of color and low-income communities by putting transportation infrastructure right through communities. And so in terms of the EPA, they have provided the statistic that more than 45 million people in the US live within 300 feet of a major roadway or a transportation facility like a warehouse or a port. And so this does cause air pollution and health impacts. Next, I wanted to share a quick slide about the impact of climate pollution and showing that as the planet warms, the daily heat records are outpacing cold records. This is a slide, it's a snapshot of Washington, D.C. data, but the organization Climate Central, which is made up of meteorologists, journalists, and scientists, have produced charts like this from around the globe. And it's just a stunning snapshot of what the how we are seeing the effects of climate pollution today. So I work with a team of incredible attorneys, analysts, organizers, and policy experts, and we've been here before. We had actually planned for this possibility of Trump winning a second term. This is not the reality we wanted to move into 2025 on, but it is the case, and we are gearing up. So in terms of the federal landscape, we'll be pushing back against policy rollbacks. In 2016, 2017, we really geared up in terms of our attorneys pushing back on the Trump administration trying to turn back the clock on any achievements from the previous administration, and that's where we are right now. In terms of the state and local leadership, we see a lot of opportunities for elevating state and local leadership and continuing the campaigns that we have in progress. The Sierra Club is a grassroots organization. Let me get into that slide. So we have 64 chapters around the country that demonstrate state and local leadership. Many of them are active on policymaking in the or partnering with advocates on the ground that are advancing climate policies at the state houses, and we're excited for that to continue. And we're the oldest grassroots environmental organization in the US. This is a snapshot of the transportation advocacy that we lead. I will just say quickly, and we can share these slides for sharing later, but essentially we've been working on state and federal policy. We've been working to reduce emissions at ports and rail yards and warehouses. We've also been active on ensuring there's more charging infrastructure for electric vehicles and electric trucks and cars and buses. And we have been working to make sure that we're working in auto accountability as well to make sure that there are more affordable electric vehicles. We also have a few national initiatives that I'll go through quickly. One is our smart growth and urban infill policy, and we've been working with chapters to make sure that they are lifting up the need for more smart growth. And we did a webinar series recently to make sure that all of our chapters had the resources they needed to move these policies forward. Transit to Trails is a great collaboration with our Outdoors for All campaign, which is a sister campaign. And the idea here is that, as we are encouraging folks around the country to get out into nature, to enjoy trails and parks, we want to make sure that those parks are not only accessible by car. And so we want to invest in transit routes that get folks out to trailheads and make sure that parks and whether they're state parks or national parks are also accessible by bike or train or active transportation in general. And so we have been working on the federal Transit to Trails bill and have a number of initiatives that our chapters are leading. And we've also paired this with incredible initiatives like the Transit Equity Day that the Labor Network for Sustainability leads, and the National Week Without Driving. We are a partner of that, and I know that America Walks is a great partner on that initiative as well. And then finally, there is a rail report that we released last year. The essence of this is that rail is a climate solution. And so we want to make sure that their investment in more passenger rail and freight rail. And essentially, this was a guidebook for making sure that we are advocating for rail policies around the country. I have a couple of brief updates related to our state initiatives. This comes from our Maryland chapter. They're working with partners to pass a bill that aligns transportation investments with their climate goals and an effort to reduce vehicle miles traveled. So this is a really exciting broad coalition. This work started last year and it's moving forward into 2025. Next, in terms of our Minnesota chapter, they've been major advocates for rail in Minnesota, and they are extremely excited about the Borealis service that started earlier this year and has now, or expanded earlier this year and is advocating for a third daily train along the corridor. And then finally, in New York, over the summer, Governor Hochul announced an indefinite pause, and Sierra Club and several partners filed a lawsuit in terms of making sure that it was restarted and restarted on time. And then we were excited to come to a settlement in November, and that program will be starting in January as expected. There are benchmarks that we are going to keep monitoring, but we are optimistic that that is moving forward. And then finally, just want to give a shout out to our many chapters around the country. If you're interested in joining the Sierra Club or learning more about the transportation projects that are currently underway, I encourage you to check out our website, sierraclub.org, to see what campaigns are near you. And I also have a couple of resources that I just want to give a shout out to. A couple of books that I use as reference, and Anna Ziberts, the author on the book on the right, is a fellow Bike League board director. So her book is incredible, and I just wanted to mention it. And then also a couple of podcasts that I listen to regularly that I really enjoy and are really helpful in this work. So finally, I will pass it to Hana.
Hey folks, great to be here with you all. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So today I'll give a brief background on the Greenlining Institute in case you're not familiar. I'll share a little bit more about our state and national strategies in the past few years, and then how we're working with our state partners on shifting our approach in light of the presidential election. So the Greenlining Institute works towards a future where communities of color can build wealth, live in healthy places filled with economic opportunity, and will be ready to meet the challenges posed by climate change. We work across multiple issue areas, but my focus area is transportation within the context of climate equity. So in practice, that involves lots of policy advocacy, capacity building work at the state level, primarily in California, where we are based. But in light of the opportunities through the Biden administration, where historic levels of federal funding was unlocked, in the past few years, Greenlining has expanded our capacity building work to support community partners in a handful of states. So a few years ago, we launched Greenlining the Block, which supports the leadership and expertise of 24 community-based organizations across California, Illinois, Michigan, North Carolina, and Colorado to maximize federal, state, and local infrastructure investments to advance climate justice projects that meet their needs. We subgranted $4.1 million in unrestricted funds to our community partners, provided support to help those partners unlock and receive over $100 million in public and private grants. And as a result, partners acquired 12 new properties and are now advancing projects around clean transportation, clean energy, housing, and other climate resilience projects. And so I share this as background for a little bit of good news around, the state of what's happening, but then kind of in contrast to be honest, the really depressing federal administration change. While until those dollars run out, we'll continue to be providing that capacity building, that technical assistance to help our partners access those funds. And even after that, we'll continue to provide the implementation support to make sure these programs and projects are successful. But, we're all aware of this really scary new political climate we're entering into. I don't know what stages of grief you all are at. I am personally kind of oscillating between the what the hell is going on stage and let's strategize and let's make a plan stage. And so lucky for you all, today I'll be sharing the strategy and the plan piece. I believe it's necessary to combat just the really wild and unpredictable nature of the next 4 years. So for Greenlining and many of our partners, this strategy will mean doubling down on our state and local efforts to push transportation policies and shift funds in a way that centers climate and equity. Greenlining has long been a member of California's Climate Plan Network, and I serve as a co-chair on the steering committee. This network includes 50 plus grassroots and grasstops advocacy organizations across the state. It has served as a hub, a coalition to drive transformative policy change with a focus on aligning transportation funding with equity, health, and climate goals. We coordinate on statewide legislation, agency advocacy, and more. We amplify community voices, including through subgranting to grassroots organizations. And we build bridges across issue areas, across geographies, including supporting regional coalitions. So next, I'll share some background on our campaign from this past year and how it's kind of setting us up for this political moment. So again, despite this historic federal investments in climate and clean transportation that Beth gave a great overview of, Climate Plan has always recognized that a huge part of the problem is at the state level. So much of this new federal money goes directly to the states, who basically have no requirements or incentives to do anything but business as usual, which means continue to build more highways, continue to underinvest in walking, biking, and public transit. And so our 2024 California campaign was very much centered around shedding light on these bad practices and shifting funds to climate-friendly projects. So a lot of Climate Plan's collective work in this past year was fighting key highway expansion projects. Now, I know we have a bit more of a national audience here. And so maybe you think of California as a super progressive state, but that does not extend to our approach on highways. And so just as in many of your states, the road and highway building lobby has massive sway and influence. And our governor, the leadership of our state Department of Transportation, the legislator has just really failed to curtail our massive investment in highways, which are undercutting our progress in investing in walking, biking, and transit projects. As a result, there are over 200 planned highway expansion projects, some of which have very questionable environmental impact reports. So Climate Plan coordinates our members to push back on funding approvals for some of the worst of these highway projects. We've pushed legislation to limit funding for these expansions, which I'll expand more on in the next slide. And we're also building public awareness through a lot of media around these actions, as seen in this LA Times article. And then last but not least, some of our members are filing lawsuits against some of the worst highway expansion projects. So next, focusing on legislation for this past year. Our campaign included some of the following bills. AB 2086, this was really foundational for us. We knew we just needed some baseline transparency and accountability of state dollars. This bill required our State Department of Transportation to report the climate, equity, safety, and economic impact of individual transportation projects. And we are happy to say this one was signed by the governor. Then was SB 960. This accelerated the build out of safe bicycle and pedestrian and transit projects on state-owned roads, also signed by the governor. Then there was AB 2535. It set an investment target for electrification and limited funding for highway expansion projects in one of the worst performing programs. It was not successful this year, but we're already strategizing on how to revive certain elements of the bill in this upcoming legislative session. So in the context of the Trump administration, we are gearing up for even more. I don't know about you all, but I'm ready for a fight. And for Greenlining and our partners, that fight is strategically placed at the state level. So we spent the past year developing a multi-year grassroots-led campaign focused on stopping and mitigating highway expansion projects, shifting highway funding and increasing funding for public transit and walking, biking, and electrification, building climate resilience and community resilience into transportation projects. And then lastly, ensuring that long-term funding is sustainable and beyond just the gas tax and is prioritizing the kinds of transportation projects we want to see in the most historically disadvantaged communities. And so how will we be advancing that campaign? Well, first, we're putting a process in place to develop a governance strategy for our campaign and our very large coalition. We need clear decision-making processes on what to prioritize. We need to figure out joint fundraising agreements and how to prioritize subgrants to which organizations. We also need to build power across sectors, such as with labor and housing. And so, for example, as transportation advocates, we are working with housing advocates to develop a legislative concept that would ban highway expansion projects if it would displace homes and businesses. And if you're like, wait, that practice from the 60s can't actually still be happening today, You would unfortunately be wrong. In California, road expansion projects have displaced more than 10,000 families and demolished their homes in over the last 30 years. And our State Department of Transportation will soon be releasing statistics on the prevalence of this practice just in the last 5 years alone. And apparently the numbers are pretty shocking. And so our goal with this bill proposal is to tie these bad transportation projects directly to the housing crisis and force decision makers to pay attention. We hope this approach would be successful this upcoming year and put into law, but even if not, we would consider it a win, as using this as a way to educate our legislators and force them to vote on this really important issue. So I just shared like a really quick snapshot preview of our forthcoming campaign in California. There's going to be a lot more coming soon as our legislative session kicks off. And I just wanted to also flag, this California campaign is part of a growing national network connected to other states who are developing similar campaigns. That will be publicly launched early next year, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it soon. But what I'm most excited about is how this strategy is very much focused on bolstering state efforts, grassroots-led efforts to combat whatever kind of crazy comes out of the Trump administration. So thanks so much. I'm looking forward to the panel conversation and putting my contact information up on the slide here. Thanks.
Thank you, Hana and Catherine and Beth. I invite you all to, oh, you already beat me. Turn on your screens, join the panel fun. We got questions in the chat. Definitely encourage all of our attendees, enter some more questions if you have them. But let's start with this one. I think, Beth, you made it increasingly clear that with the bipartisan infrastructure law, with the limited guardrails that were on that, action was always maybe or should have always been directed at the state and local level. Even if I think in the past month or so we've been collectively considering that pivot more strongly. And so as advocates enter 2025. I think, Catherine, you provided a few different examples in Maryland, Minnesota, and New York, and Hana, you certainly provided some examples in California. What types of policies or legislation should advocates be looking to advance at the state and local level in the areas of active transportation, safety, climate in 2025, and where are some successes in other states that they can look to try and replicate?
I was going to leave some of those questions for those who are working more in states than me. I'm happy to point to things that I've seen. I think that Catherine and Hana pointed out some good things going on and that can be utilized in California, Minnesota, and Colorado. But before I point out the state action, I just want to further express my general frustration with those trying to improve transportation, pivoting to the states when Republicans are in charge in DC and not when Democrats are in charge. We need the program has made state DOTs the king. And so we always need to pay attention to those with power. But no matter who is in charge in Washington, D.C., we need to pay attention to the federal law, because the last three bills have been done with Democrats in charge of the White House. The last one, they were in charge of all three branches of government. The one before that, it was a Republican Congress and a Democratic administration. The one before that was a Democratic House and administration, or Democratic Senate and administration, Republican House. And the results are always the same. So the faith in Democrats has been, should have been obliterated 15 years ago, but somehow no one ever learns. So I want us to move away from pretty language into actual action. So we've seen some exciting things come out of Colorado, where, for example, they're requiring all highway projects to be very to stay, well, those who are sponsoring the highway projects to be clear about how much emissions will come from it, and they must offset that. They could go further and require their models to be right. They undercount the emissions, but even with bad modeling, That's been too much for a lot of projects to go forward. Minnesota has been very active in setting both standards for funding active transportation, lowering VMT, also looking at offsetting CO2 emissions from transportation. Virginia has created a process whereby they score all new capacity projects based on things like improving safety, improving access to jobs and necessities for those that don't have access to a vehicle, all kinds of great measures that should be used more broadly. So there's lots of great things going on around the country. We just need it to be going on in more places and all these ideas taking place in one state, not separate good ideas in separate states.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Beth mentioned. And I think the opportunities, of course, will vary widely depending on the state, on the political context. From a California perspective, I'm sure maybe some of you heard about Newsom proposing $25 million for legal fights to Trump-proof California. And sure, there's utility to this, right? But that alone is so not enough. And what better way to Trump-proof California by not just maintaining the right to set our climate and equity goals, but to actually meet them. California has all of these goals already, but we are so far from actually delivering on them. And so, what better way to, again, Trump-proof California by actually putting those dollars where our mouth is. And I think we shouldn't just be on the defense with the Trump administration. Let's get on the offense. Let's be more visionary and bold. And then for other states that maybe are a little bit more purple, a little bit more red, I think at a bare minimum, leading with a narrative and a messaging around transparency and accountability of transportation dollars could be effective. Again, this last year in California, we were successful with this bill that essentially seeked to uncover how are transportation projects delivering on concrete outcomes. We got unanimous bipartisan support at every step of the way. We framed it very much as a good governance approach, wanting to make sure that we're using our public dollars appropriately. So again, I think the opportunity will vary widely depending on the political context of the state, and excited for what's to come.
I'll just add quickly that thank you to Beth for mentioning the policies in Colorado and Minnesota. The work there is really making sure that those policies are implemented and really lifting up those as examples. The bill that I talked about in Maryland is modeled after Colorado and Minnesota. And so we are really trying to identify other states where we can lift up this model legislation and build coalition and build power to move that forward. We also, Sierra Club is really working to make sure that we are breaking down the silos. A lot of the time, or I should say, in some cases, we have some coalitions where folks are only working on public transit or only working on EVs. And in terms of Sierra Club, we really see this as a holistic way of decarbonizing the transportation space, and that we shouldn't just be working on one or the other, but really building a broader coalition and making sure that we're all working together and breaking down these silos, in particular because of right now, with the state departments of transportation actually getting funding for building out electric vehicle charging infrastructure and really taking a hard look at what their investments are, how they're spending their money, what their budgets consist of, and actually spending more on electrification and less on highway widening and highway expansion, thinking really critically of how their budgets are made up and pushing them to do more.
And we saw in this last election as well, we've covered the federal, state to a good degree, a little less so local. But we saw in this last election, and this comes from a question too, a really high success rate for local ballot initiatives for transit and sustainable transportation investments. And so our questioner asks here, is this something, what do you make of this trend? And is this something you see as, or can interpret as having broad and bipartisan support for sustainable transportation?
They should. I have found that there are groups, and particularly the Trump team is better at taking information that confirms their priors. So the facts on the ground probably don't win the day on that. However, they are more likely to move people within Congress. So reminding your congressional delegation, how much your local is their local constituents are supporting transit, that they showed it at the ballot, that they did that to match federal dollars. Really making it about local issues for members of Congress will be very, very helpful. I think showing those that might not have as much transit locally, where, if this is the case, they might be getting jobs to manufacture parts for transit. It's something that we could really up and push, and could be powerful. So I think going to an all politics are local for the feds will be valuable and important.
And if I could just add on to that, I completely agree with what Beth just mentioned. And it is a good sign, right, that we're seeing this support for walking, biking, transit investments. And for that to be successful, for it to be impactful, there's also then a need to couple that with a decrease in highway investments. I mean, the numbers just show like the highway investments just undercut all the progress in walking, biking, transit. And I mean, even labor trade groups, in our experience, like, sure, they're happy for more dollars for these sustainable transportation investments. That's more jobs on their end. But the minute the conversation gets around to then shifting funds from highways to walking, biking, transit, like that, is a no-go. So I think we do need to figure out like how we can still make a compelling case to those groups that like walking, biking, transit dollars absolutely can create just as many jobs, just as many high quality jobs as road projects. But definitely a lot more work to do on that end.
A great segue into a few of our other questions about building allies, both locally and at the state level, particularly coming up with, again and again, talking about labor and talking about jobs that are typically associated with highway building and highway widening. What sort of arguments or case or outreach do you all see that you can do, you being our attendees can do, with groups like labor as you're looking to work at that state or local level?
I'm trying hard to resist going first every time. But you have pressured me out by your silence. The relationship with labor is going to be very hard. Labor has taken the position, and it's because labor is not one thing. And that's very, very important. And labor has a hierarchy of power within it, that there are certain unions where their jobs rely on laying new pavement, and they are the most powerful entities. There is also a belief that only through building new highways and not reconstruction that there are more jobs. I don't think that is true. But I don't know that we should tackle this as a facts issue. I think we need to recognize that there are people who are struggling as much as anybody else in this country, and they're worried about future employment. And we need to meet that concern where they are and look for ways to make something other than highway expansion good for them. And so instead of telling people they're wrong, asking them how doing things that you support could be good for them might be a better way to start there. And recognizing that if we have a split in transportation where labor finds themselves matched with anti-labor advocates, that might not be the best place for them, that we would do better to talk about supporting one another rather than, labor saying that they're going to fight tooth and nail against other parts of the progressive movement. Now, this is going to have to be handled locally because labor is very diversified across the country. And so I am now going to hand things over to Hana and Katherine, who can talk about what's going on locally, since each state's power structure within labor is very, very different.
Yeah, I think for us, in a lot of ways, like we are thinking about this in terms of shifting the narrative, just in the way that the fossil fuel industry has very much been exposed for their bad practices in the past, few decades. I think we need to do the same thing with the road builder lobby, the highway lobby. Your average person has no idea that there's these interest groups who are very much benefiting from a broken transportation system that is frankly not serving anyone. So I think that's part of it. And then I think we also need to talk about transportation in a different way. I think that this election in particular highlighted that people's top priorities are cost of living, are their pocketbooks. And I think too often as transportation nerds, and I fully admit I'm one of them, I think we get wrapped up in the jargon, in the connection to climate change, which I think is just hard for people to understand and prioritize when they're dealing with so many other issues in their day-to-day lives. So I think part of it is being able to talk about transportation much more so as relating to how it is directly impacting people's economic opportunities, the jobs that they're able to access, the time stuck in traffic away from their families. So I think in a lot of ways, part of it is a narrative. Obviously, that's not going to completely shift the challenges that we're dealing with in the labor context, but I think it can be helpful in making the case to elected officials. And then, back to what I mentioned earlier around there probably are certain ways we can be building bridges with labor in making the case that walking, biking, public transit projects can still be advancing jobs. Maybe not the road building jobs that they're used to, but maybe we can be trying to break off certain factions of the labor folks.
So this is a huge question, and Beth is absolutely right that the labor is not a monolith, and we have to really think through how job creation and new jobs and the workforce is engaged in our transportation system, which for far too long has just been essentially a broken, polluting system that has created more congestion, more, as Hana said, time away from our families, and way too much climate pollution. So one thing to think about this is really pushing back on the status quo of departments of transportation that have essentially rewarded the unions that are responsible for building highways and expanding highways. And rethinking how we want to create and co-create a transportation system that benefits communities, families, workers, and the planet. So this is something that we're excited to work on. I will also say that in many parts of the country, electrician unions like IBEW are extremely excited about building out transportation infrastructure for charging infrastructure for EV charging. There are other ways of thinking about how we shift the dollars in terms of making sure that we are building a better transportation system.
You mentioned changing the narrative, and we just got a question in, talking about linking climate change and health outcomes and making it, just shifting that narrative so that it's not about emissions, but more about healthier people. So I pose to all of you, what's the narrative shift that you would want to make in 2025? What do you want to be talking about as an advocate if you're pursuing sustainable transportation? How are you framing that?
one thing I've been leading with is no matter how you get around in the US, your needs are not being met. If you're a pedestrian, or a biker, you're at risk of getting hit by a car. If you drive to work, you're probably stuck in traffic and, there's potholes everywhere. And so I just think it's important to convey to folks that we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on a transportation system that is not working for anyone. We are all losing. And we need to hold our government accountable towards putting those dollars into a transportation system that is clean, that is, not polluting the air, that's getting folks to and from their destinations efficiently, that's safe. And I think that's kind of part of like building a broad coalition that, again, like whether you drive an electric vehicle or take transit or walking or biking, like we all should be united in holding our government accountable to making better investments.
I could not agree with that more. We have found that the arguments that work for conservatives work very well on progressives and liberals. Vice versa is not the case. So going all in on a progressive argument is not always the best strategy. We can raise those issues, but we probably should never go totally in on them, because saving the taxpayer dollars works for everybody. Improving safety works for everybody. Improving access to jobs and business access to talent works for everybody. A more productive economy, utilizing our limited land to create jobs, taxes, economic activity, rather than, as is in many cases, underutilized roadways that cost money. These are arguments like fix it first. These are arguments that really work for everybody. And they're just nonpartisan. It's not that they're bipartisan, they're nonpartisan. And the beauty is the stuff we're looking to do is good on all of those fronts. So we can talk to people and basically say, use this as a Rorschach test. What do you care about? Because what we're trying to do is really good for whatever it is.
I'll just add that, right now we really, there's two things that I think is important. One is really naming what has gotten us into this mess. So, the oil industry, corporate interests that are influencing how state DOTs continue to perpetuate highway expansions. This car culture that, I saw in one of the questions, Parking Reform Network, they're a major partner of ours. We have to rethink how we get around, and the idea of parking requirements actually hinders us from shifting away from transit and active transportation. So really kind of naming the villains here and calling them out and talking about solutions is important. And then also, for far too long, we have relied on the gas tax. We need to think creatively and uplift the pilots that are reforming the gas tax and thinking about other ways of funding transportation in a way that is not just structured on gasoline. And I think really looking at VMT targets is super important, and thinking through ways that can actually push the narrative and push the incentives and the funding towards alternatives to driving.
I think altogether some excellent food for thought for our attendees today. It certainly gives them all some great direction for 2025. So let's go ahead. We can thank our panelists for a great conversation today and their insights. As I said, we'll have we'll get the slides and the webinar recording out via email to all you who have attended. Once again, programming like this is made possible by small donors like you. So there is a link in the chat if you would like to donate today and keep this programming going. Speaking of keeping this programming going, you can join us January 15th at 2 p.m. for our next webinar, Health Benefits of Walkability. Link to register for that is also in the chat. So thank you again to Beth, Katherine, and Hana, and thank you all for attending. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, all.